Welcome to the Game and Gadget podcast. Hi, I'm James Woodcock from Pixel Refresh, and of course I have with me Tony Warriner, one of the founders of Revolution Software, writing a book about Revolution Software and his time and his founding of it, his work with it, right up until, very recently indeed. And I think that's probably the longest introduction I've given you so far, Tony, so welcome again.
Thank you. That was pretty good, actually. Pretty comprehensive.
It's expanding as time progresses, definitely.
Yeah, as you learn more about me.
Yes. So, yes, and if we established anything from the last podcast, it was if Tony invites you to the pub, he's wanting a favour. In fact, there's a good starting point. Your book, you said you had a friend who might be able to do you a video for Kickstarter. Have you been able to nab him at a pub yet?
I haven't yet, no, but I will do. Coming up fairly soon. And there's no great rush, but you reminded me of that.
Poor guy.
So busy trying to write this thing and remember things that planning ahead. And like my head is like 20 years ago, so like planning ahead is difficult. But yeah, soon. I mean, I'm starting to look at things like printing costs and stuff like that, and the vast nightmare that's going to be. But yeah, the video, yeah, good point.
You'll get there, my friend. It's an epic.
Did
project.
I tell you? Did I talk about the idea though?
In the sense of what? Explain.
Well, in Kickstarter, it's very important to have a good video, I think, and you look at the projects, and I mean, a lot of them don't have a good video, and it's obvious that they've not put a lot of effort into it. So, I mean, I guess like that kind of comes across, doesn't it? You know, if you've not put the effort into the video, then what are you going to put the effort into? I suppose it might be some people's thinking on that. I always remember, our experience of Kickstarter Revolution was that just before us was the Tim Schafer Double Fine video, which has to go down in history as one of the all-time greats. I watched it again recently, actually, because it's sat there on YouTube, I think, and it is a pretty good video. And obviously at Revolution, we were quite taken in by that. I mean, they did us a great favor in a way, because they set the benchmark. So, I mean, we put a lot of effort into our Brutal Sword 5 one, a huge amount of effort.
So what did they do in the Double Fine one?
The Double Fine one, well, I mean, it was Tim Schafer basically walking around his office talking, but, I mean, it was just very nicely done, and the script was very good, and it was also quite funny. He had a very good joke in there. He said something like, adventure games, they're in our dreams, they're in our fantasies. They're in Germany, which was a very good, astute thing to say, because Germany is the place where adventure games still sell well. So it was quite a funny joke, and we all laughed at it. So I think we were taken in very taken in by the whole thing and impressed by it. So we threw a lot of resource at our video. So, I mean, if I'm going to do my own Kickstarter, I guess I need to do a good video for it, something cheap, but funny, because humor doesn't cost anything, does it? So, the idea is to instead of spending a lot of money, is to have a lot of funny stuff in there. That's the idea. But anyway, a Revolution, part of the thing I talk about in the book, and forgive me if I talked about this already, but we used to, before we had a network, we used to get discs and throw them to each other. I did talk about this, didn't I? Because you would damage your finger and stuff. So anyway, the idea on this video is to recreate the floppy throwing antics, but I figure that will actually be quite hard to do. You know, if you're going to get a camera in there to do a slow-mo of a disc going like this, then
it sounds
there's
like
going
you
to be
need
some
some
accidents.
computer animation involved as well.
Yeah, that sounds expensive though, doesn't it?
Well,
my idea
there's
is to
all
point a
levels of
camera at it.
computer animation if you look on the internet.
That's true. That's true.
It depends
But
how
I
good
say
you want it to look.
Let's just film it. How hard can it be? Yeah, we did talk about all this, didn't we?
We
talked about
we did.
the idea of the 360 thing. Yeah, we're not going to do that. But anyway, there should be some good outtakes, shouldn't there?
So
The
how?
outtakes will be fun. They'll be funny. They'll be funny.
So I guess the key is, I mean, in terms of assets, it's all right you writing a book, but there's other things that add to that experience. So you already said in the last podcast you were going to add a lot of pictures, for example.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that a good library? Is this something you've got yourself, or is this something you've had to ask people to get? I mean, obviously these are things you can put within the video to help promote it. And is there any video whatsoever?
Actual video of Revolution.
Yeah,
type
in
stuff.
early days.
No. There's nothing. I mean, there's very few photographs, to be honest. I mean, it's astonishing, really, to think about it, because you know, photographs are ubiquitous these days, aren't they? Everyone's taking photos all the time and sticking them on Instagram and stuff.
Thanks to the mobile
But in those
phone,
days,
yeah.
we just didn't. Yeah, we just didn't. We just didn't take photos. I mean, I had a quite a good camera at the time, but he didn't lug it around with you. You know, you just never think about it. It's a shame, really. It's a shame. But there was very few. I mean, there are some. There are some photos. I mean, most of which have been put out there in one form or another already. But I mean, it'd be nice to have them all in one place. What we've got. So yeah, there's a fair few photos of the various different offices, which are interesting to look at, because you see how different it was. You know, like ashtrays and people smoking at their desks and stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
how wild is that? You know, if you walked into an office now with computers, like people were smoking, you'd drop your cup of tea, wouldn't you? You wouldn't believe it.
You drop your cup of tea. How British is this? If we needed to confirm this was a British-based podcast, you've just done it right there. We would drop our cup of tea in astonishment.
We'd drop it, yeah. Imagine that, people smoking.
But talking of 20 years ago, Tony, this makes me feel old. So the Xbox, the very first Xbox, was released over 20 years ago. They've recently celebrated their 20th anniversary. And it did get me thinking to the Xbox quite a lot. It was actually the first console I ever purchased on launch day, as in I pre-ordered it and I got it on the day. It was the first one I did it.
Right.
Now, to most
Right.
people, my reasoning for doing this is a little obscure. Now, to me, logically at the time, this made sense. But to a lot of people, it's like, well, that's a funny reason to go for an Xbox instead of, you know, around the time it would have been PlayStation 2, for example. And my reason was, Tony, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
It was the first console to support Dolby Digital 5.1.
Right. Is that good?
I don't know. I'm just waiting for the tumbleweed. It was to me. So, in PC gaming terms, to get a 5.1 rig was quite difficult. And often, if you wanted to get that experience, it was ropey. So I remember my first Dolby Digital 5.1 for the PC I ever got. No game supported Dolby Digital 5.1.
Right.
And didn't for a long time. So actually the main benefit of that was you could listen to audio in 5.1, i.e. there was specific music tracks you could get in 5.1 Dolby Digital as demos and things, which was quite nice just to experience surround. Or you'd put in a DVD. But for gaming, you didn't really get the utilization of Dolby Digital's way of doing 5.1. Now, later on, sound cards would have multiple outputs and ports, so you could then plug into a system that was designed for that type of interface. But if yours was specifically Dolby Digital 5.1, forget it. Chances were you were stuck. You either did it in stereo, and if you were lucky, up-mixed, so it gave the illusion of surround sound. But then the Xbox came along, and with its digital fiber optic output, you could then plug in your optical cable to your set of speakers, and the games would be Dolby Digital 5.1. The vast majority of them were. It was actually quite rare for it to be either, stereo.
Was ours?
So that was my reasoning. Sorry?
Were our games 5.1? Did we actually support it?
I can't remember. Xbox. So bearing in mind, Broken Sword 3 and 4 were actual 3D games. So it wasn't like Broken Sword 1 and 2 where it was the 2D with the 2D perspective. It was literally 3D games and characters. Yeah. I honestly can't remember. I probably reviewed one of them back in the day, but I'll have to look for that and see if I mention whether it was 5.1 or stereo.
I can't.
But certainly that's the reason why I got it. And then this thing called Halo was there at launch, which kind of revolutionized first-person shooters. And it wasn't the first by any stretch of the imagination, but it was the one that finally got the controller input right.
Right.
So before that, it would have been keyboard, mouse, or nothing. Or if there was a first-person shooter on, say, a PlayStation 2, it never felt right, where Halo just had it so good. You wanted to play the game with the controller. You didn't mind. And there's still a little bit of a learning curve if you had been a keyboard and mouse man like me. But it made it possible.
I mean, we all came from Doom, so we were completely hooked on, the mouse. For looking around. I mean, it was pretty much a perfect UI, wasn't it?
Well, you say looking around at Doom, but you couldn't really look up and down, could you?
Well, that's true. That's Quake, wasn't it? Which was another, they amazed everyone with Doom, and then they amazed everyone with Quake a bit later on. But yeah, I mean, I can't remember what the controls for Doom were. I guess they were even simpler, weren't they? But I mean, that was the part of the beauty of Doom, wasn't it? It was, it was kind of, the restriction actually made it work even better, because in a way they went slightly backwards with Quake, because it wasn't as easy to control because there was more movement. So to actually move with the same efficiency as you did in Doom, it was actually harder. That was the irony of it. I mean, they gave you more freedom, but it made it you actually also lost something in the process, which has probably never come back.
Yeah, the days of shareware. And before, of course, Doom, there was Wolfenstein 3D, which was amazing. I had that on the Acorn Archimedes A3010 on floppy disk, and I had hours and hours of fun in Wolfenstein 3D, but it was a very, very basic 3D style, shall we say, first-person shooter. But it was more like each level was mazes, essentially. Opening doors, finding keys. But there was no idea of levels in the sense of there was no stairs in Wolfenstein 3D. You were completely flat. You had your floor, you had your ceiling, you had your walls, and it was either a big open room, which was maybe a rectangle or a square, or a narrow corridor. There was no stairs. There was no. The idea of a lift was just to hide the fact that it was going to then load the next level. But there was no inclination or anything like that. That was where Doom came in. Where on the very first moment you jump into Doom, you can drop down a couple of blocks and move up a set of stairs and collect something to restore shield. Or I'm going completely from memory here. But I think one of the exciting aspects was, I don't know if it cost them as much money as they made in the end. So shareware Doom, I was quite happy just playing that first episode that was provided with it. I never felt the need to get the additional levels until much later. I'd just keep replaying the same ones. And the weird thing is, years later when I did get those extra levels, the Ultimate Doom on CD, I didn't enjoy them as much. And I'm not sure if it was just because I played the first lot so many times and I enjoyed the way that worked. To me, that was Doom. As soon as I got the extra content, I was like, I'm not sure I'm quite enjoying it as much.
It's too much.
And of course, Shiro was, you get a free episode. And the idea was that would encourage you then, once you completed the game, it would say, now you can purchase extra episodes, 2, 3, and maybe there was a fourth one, but I think it was just 2 and 3. And you can mail off for this. And that was shareware.
Still, I think it was better than the current free-to-play trend of paying constantly for the weapons and the levels and everything, and the whole thing's designed to get you to do that. I mean, that's a step backwards, isn't it? But
okay, so you had a real grump.
I prefer what they were doing.
Yeah, so you had a real grump about free to play on particularly things like Android. I think it's probably one of the worst offenders for it. What is it for you about free to play that you dislike so much? And then I'll jump in.
Well, it's not. Well, it is gaming, isn't it? But it's so far removed from the values that we all grew up with, as in it was all about gameplay and, I mean, to some degree technology as well, because it was a showcase and people, in the way that Wolfenstein became Doom and Doom became Quake and so on. I mean, there was the programmers were making advances and then they'd go, right, this is where we're going to stop innovating the tech and we'll make a game from it, and then we'll move forward again and do another one. I mean, that was fine, but that was a natural cycle. But I mean, this modern stuff, they're just designing these products with the aim of funneling people towards the next in-app purchase, aren't they? I mean, the game is not designed for any other purpose, really. I mean, everything else is a veneer, isn't it? It's just to funnel you towards these purchase points. So, I mean, it's not proper gaming as we know it.
No, the gameplay is literally skewed towards you. You have to really grind to get to a certain level in your game status to be able to progress, to make any progression. And by grind, I mean you're having to replay maybe the same thing over and over again, get the same resources, whatever the game type is. Or you can get there quicker if you're willing to pay for it. And it would appear to be that free-to-play is pretty successful from a commercial standpoint. So it's only going to encourage more of these games, unfortunately. And that's not to say all of them are bad. I'm sure some are better than others. But still, the whole concept, I'm not a big fan of, like you, Tony.
No, I mean, if they're designing the game with the free-to-play part in mind, then it's not a good thing. I don't think it's not what we know gaming to be, is it, at all? I mean, demo's fine. You play the demo, you see if you like it or not. I mean, I always thought that they could solve. I mean, there was always a problem with should a game be free or should it be paid for? And if it's a paid game, I mean, this is on the app stores. If it's a paid for game, people won't download it because they want to see if they like it before they pay for it. I mean, what they should have, what Apple or whoever should have done is they should have said, here's a game, it's free for 20 minutes. And that's a number the developer can pick. It's a $3 game or a $5 game, but you can play it for X minutes free to see if you like it. But and the important thing would be that during that 20 minutes, you were not able to review it. So if you didn't like it, you just deleted it. We don't want to see your 1 star because you don't like the game. I mean, who cares? If you don't like it and you haven't paid for it, then who cares what you think of it? It's of no relevance, is it? If you like it enough to buy it, then you enter a zone where you're able to leave a genuine review. Now you may having paid, you may feel that you've been tricked somehow into, you've played your 20 minutes, then you've paid your $5, and then there's only another 25 minutes of gameplay, or it repeats itself too much, or it doesn't, has no progression, or there might be genuine reasons why it's a bad game after that, which is fine, and go review the game, and give it a bad score based on those things. But who wants to know, who has any interest? If you've gone into, if you're the person who's bought Broken Sword on the App Store, or downloaded it for free, and then writes a review with 1 star saying, "Where's the swords?" We don't, as someone did. We don't want to know. Too bad. You're not. No one's interested in your ridiculous position. You thought it was a sword fighting game. It's not a sword fighting game. Delete it off your phone and move on to the next game, which will have some swords in it, hopefully, of the type you wanted. But that would solve a lot of problems, because basically people could see if they. And I understand the psychology. Are you going to like this game? You're not reading magazines anymore to see if they like it first. And giving it a 9 out of 10 in Edge magazine or something. No one's going through that process with a mobile game anymore, are they? That it's a lot more immediate. So they're probably looking at the review scores, which is fine, but they need to be a real thing, don't they? If they're not based on stupidity or misunderstandings or whatever they are at the moment. So let people try it. That's fine. But we don't. If you didn't like it at that point, we don't care. Once you've paid for it and you've got some commitment to it, we're in a zone where we're interested in what you've got to say about it. And that would have solved a lot of problems. And I can't understand why these people never implemented that kind of model, because it would have been, because they didn't like it when you did a free version of the game and a paid version of the game, and you had to somehow limit the free one in some way. They were always moaning about that. They didn't like that. The App Store people on both sides, but they never went so far as to implement what I thought was a perfect solution. And I did actually tell our Apple guy this amazing solution of mine, but it didn't get fed all the way back up to Cupertino and implemented, unfortunately. But I reckon it would solve a lot of problems, and maybe it would mean, because their whole in-app purchase and free-to-play thing, which came from, I think, probably came from Apple. I mean, they unleashed hell on earth with that stuff, so that they could have unwound the position they'd created by implementing something a bit more clever. But unfortunately, we are where we are. And now you have the Candy Crushes of this world, where they're spending, I don't know if it's still true, maybe it is, but at one point they were spending $1 million a day on banner ads in other people's games to get new players to churn into Candy Crush, and they were earning like $1,010,000, per day. They were spending the $1 million and making $1,010,000. So they come out of it with $10,000, and go, well, hey, what a great model for a business, I mean, it's ridiculous, and so far removed from, when you and I used to read our magazines and pick a game we like the look of based on a reviewer who we knew their preferences and respected their writing and judgment, go to the shops and buy the game, and we probably wouldn't be far wrong, would we?
No. Or if we were feeling a little bit more like gambling, we'd look on the back of the cassette or the box at the in-game screenshots and maybe purchase it on the basis of that. And that was particularly tricky, I think, when you had an 8-bit computer and it said this was compatible with the Commodore 64, and unless you were very careful, sometimes it would say screenshots from, and it'd be from a more powerful system.
Yeah. Oh, and ideally it would have 100% machine code written on the front.
I wasn't part of that time when you used to get the code in a magazine and you would type it up, and that'd be like your first game. To me, that blows my
listings.
mind, because the code often didn't make a lot of sense if you'd never touched coding at all. So the characters you had to use weren't always the most obvious. They were quite obscure. And then, of course, it's code. If one of them's out of place, it would fall over, it wouldn't run.
It never worked, no. I mean, I typed a couple of them in back in the day, and they never worked for me. But I guess you got a lot of people into programming because you'd start to mess around with it, perhaps, and see how other people did stuff.
Yeah.
It was quite useful, but I mean, it was crazy. But you know.
And sometimes years later, you'd find out there was a typo in the code they provided you, so it would never ever work anyway. That was the really unfortunate bit.
Oh yeah, they'd actually printed it wrong.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah, but do you presume you don't read Wireframe magazine, the new one that's taken off the last couple of years?
No,
it's subscription only, I think, but it's kind of, it's a bit like Edge, but a bit more normal and a bit more. I mean, it's aimed at the industry, I suppose, and there's kind of industry type stuff in it as well. It's a very good magazine, but amusingly enough, and I thought they were just being ironic when they first did this, but it actually has a little listing in it each month of a bit of code that you can type into to learn how to do something. I mean, I thought it was a joke. I thought they were just being funny, but they do it every month.
Wow.
Either it's a really long-running sort of internal humor type thing, or I mean, I can't imagine anyone types these things in. I mean, you might. I guess you look at it and go, "Oh yeah, I see what they're trying to say." but yeah, they have listings in Wireframe magazine.
It's got to be for nostalgia, though, hasn't it? Even the craziest things we had to do, and maybe sometimes suffer back in the day, you still think, I'd love to have a dabble at that again. I mean, as much as I got fed up of waiting for cassettes to load, I do miss the loading screens and the music. Because often the music on the loading screen was probably more epic than what you actually got in the game sometimes.
Yeah. Well, there were different people, weren't they? So, like the loaders, especially on the 64, they became like demos, didn't they?
Yeah.
Because you would have a little tiny bit of processing power. So it was like, what could you do while you were loading the game? You could fling sprites around and stuff, and on the Commodore, you were just telling the chip to do it, so you actually had more. There was less of a CPU load than there would be on something like a Spectrum. So yeah, they did some great things on the 64 for loading.
Did you ever do much for the Commodore 64?
I never programmed it, no. Never. I mean, I used one a lot because a friend of mine had one, so we played. I mean, most of my gaming was done on the 64 on the 8-bit days. We played like Paradroid and the Braybrook Graph Gold games.
Yeah,
a lot. We played the Jeff Minter games, Mutant Camels and Matrix and all that kind of stuff. What else did we play? Oh, Elite. We played for like the whole entire summer holidays playing Elite, just going through the cycle, the gameplay cycle on Elite. What else did we play? Bruce Lee was a game we played. Bruce Lee was a brilliant game on 64. We played that a lot.
Bruce Lee, wow.
Yeah, Green Yammo. He'd come after you. It was a great game.
I did love the 8-bit genre for the actual computer and gaming. I don't think I really had an 8-bit console. At that time, it was 8-bit computer I was more into. And my friend had a ZX Spectrum on a monochrome monitor. And I had my Commodore 64 plugged into a TV. And, both had their advantages and disadvantages. But for me, the Commodore 64, it was all about that music chip, the SID chip. It was just epic, beyond whatever else was available at the time. Certainly for that price bracket.
Yeah, and there was a lot of tricks as well. So that the games kept advancing on the 64 because people were learning, how to multiplex the video chip and stuff like that to get more sprites, and then sprites in the border and all these things they learned to do in the end. It was quite astonishing. I mean, it went further than anyone ever thought it would do. And just when you thought it had topped out and nothing else would be found, they'd found something else. And I think that there was like 4K of memory in the SID chip or something like that. That they started putting game data into that as well, so the games could get ever so slightly bigger. All sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
great stuff it was. But that was the 8. That's the kind of defining feature of the 8-bit days. It was just constant advance and discoveries and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it carried on. There's ID people. They were doing the same. When they kept pushing what they could do with 3D, it was the same kind of feeling.
No, definitely. And believe it or not, I've just found my Broken Sword 3 review for the Xbox. And annoyingly, I didn't mention whether it was stereo or surround. Who knows? But the only con I gave it was loading times are long.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first Xbox?
That was the first Xbox.
So the first, that must have come quite a bit of time after the PlayStation 1 then.
Yeah, it was after the PlayStation 2 release. Quite a bit after.
Was it really?
Yeah. Because the Xbox was quite a bit faster than PlayStation 2, generally. And because it had an NVIDIA 3D graphics chip in it as well.
Right,
that made a big difference.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, of course, because Broken Sword 3 was PlayStation 2 and Xbox One, wasn't it? I think. Something I remember today actually was we went to two conferences we went to. One was a PlayStation 2 developer event in some country club in Lancashire somewhere. I can't remember where it was. And it was like just developers, and they were like Sony were kind of, oh, you guys are the absolute cream of development. So we've kind of, this is special. This is for special people. It's not just for anyone. I mean, everyone was there. Everybody was there literally, but it was like, oh, you guys are so special. We're going to show you this stuff in advance, and here's our tech guys doing little talks. And it was all about. Do you remember the PlayStation 2? It was all about the emotion engine. Yeah. And what the emotion engine actually was a really difficult to handle GPU, because you had to. I mean, I never quite understood it, but to get at the emotion engine, you had a really thin amount of bandwidth to program the thing. So you were like, it was like programming it down a little corridor, and there was a lot of power at the other end of it, but the actual pathway to it was quite narrow. It was like difficult to deal with. Because do you remember the first generation of PS2 games weren't very good? And like the rendering was really off, and people were saying, "What on earth's this? This machine's rubbish. It can't render." And there was a lot of recriminations and Sony getting irritated with people and programmers saying, "What is this crap? We can't make it work." And then it all kind of went through okay, everyone stepped back and Sony said, look, this is how you do it, and then it started to come right, and the game started to get better again. Do you remember all that?
I do. And also, but I think the PS3 is probably more synonymous with difficulty of programming with its cell processor, and then all the individual little SPUs, which would help it along.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes down to documentation. And where the PS4 shone was, it wasn't this completely out there architecture. It was actually more PC based. Ironically, more like the original Xbox One ever was, which was essentially a PC in a nice presented box.
Yeah.
And then Xbox 360 changed all that with going for an IBM processor again, PowerPC.
Yeah, well, that also reminds me. We went to a Microsoft event in London for Xbox 2, and it was in some. It wasn't as big and grand as the Sony thing, because that was like 2 days. A real big job was the Sony thing. This was like 2 hours in a hotel in London for the Xbox 360, and it was like, okay, get some programmers and show them this stuff. And there was, what they had was they had this machine on a desk at the front with a cloth over it, okay, and it was like a square thing, and the there's some very boring talks by these Microsoft kind of drone type people, just reading off stuff. You know, it was definitely dull, the whole thing. But and I don't know if they thought it was funny or not, or it was meant to be funny. But they kind of said, right, this is the big reveal, and we're going to show you it. You know, everything we've been talking about for the last 2 hours, we're going to show you it now. And someone came along and they got the cloth and pulled it off. And it was an Apple Power PC thing, a Power Mac.
Oh, wow.
Underneath, and everyone, it was hilarious. And I don't know if it was meant to be funny or not. I suppose it must have been meant to be funny because it obviously was, you know. But it was just an Apple Power Mac underneath the cloth all the time. And because that was what they were using. The dev kits were the early dev kits were Power PCs. Yeah. Pretty funny.
They're brave, and you can tell they did that behind closed doors. So,
but the funny thing was that the talks were definitely dull. You know, they were kind of like sapping the life out of everyone. You know, that it was so monochrome. Was it
didn't excite you with its technical abilities or what you could do with this thing? It was just moaning. Well, not moaning, droning on.
Droning on, yeah, it was just not interesting. We knew the stuff anyway because it had all been printed up, what the specs were. So it was nothing. There was nothing particularly enlightening about it all. But then it all led up to this hilarious joke with the cloth coming off a Macintosh.
You probably should have started with that.
Well, maybe so, and then rapidly summed it up. You know.
So here's something I've never done before. I'm going to read you the conclusion of a game you worked on that I reviewed. And this was before we'd ever met. Okay. So you ready for this?
Broken Sword 3.
Broken Sword 3 for the original Xbox. I must have wrote this nearly 20 years ago. Broken Sword is back and in 3D. I was very nervous about this title as I love the previous Broken Sword titles very much. And overall they still have managed to capture the essence. Loading times make a dodgy impact on the game, but ignore this and an amazing adventure game is waiting to entice those brain cells.
That's all right.
Yeah, it is. Control of the characters is surprisingly simple in 3D, mysterious and adventurous story. But yes, I definitely didn't like the loading times, which is interesting actually, because one of the best benefits about the original Xbox was it was a first console to have a built-in hard drive as standard.
Right. So why didn't we just dump the whole thing on the hard drive and then it would play really quick, wouldn't it?
In theory, yeah.
Was the disc spinning? Was the disc spinning when it was playing?
It was nearly 20 years ago, Tony. I'm going to have...
Yeah.
I mean, I probably got the game still. I've certainly got my 2 original Xboxes, and one of them certainly still works. Although my Duke controller, which is the original fat, really chunky controller, which wasn't the best controller in the world. It was still good enough for Halo, but it was a big beast of a thing. That's in a bit of a state of repair. The analog stick, half of the circular part on the top, which helps you rest your thumb, is all broken off. But it all works. I was playing it a few weeks ago just to see. Rally Sport Challenge 2 was the first thing I picked up to give a go, which is something that hasn't been supported in backwards compatibility, unfortunately. But I can find out once and for all, I'm sure I could Google it, but where's the fun in that, whether this game was 5.1 and if the disc is spinning and I can hear it reading data.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the voices were still on the...
That would make sense, yeah.
Floppy. That's possible, yeah. Because CDs were actually quite problematic, really, because... do you remember how it was like every subsequent model of CD drive was like, they were like 4x and 8x and 16. They were like getting faster and faster. For the actual data, the thing about it was though that they'd have quite a slow. They'd have to spin up. You know, if they were going to do 48x speed on this floppy drive, but the problem is it had to spin up. So they were great for installing software because it would go spin, and then it would go right. Install it, and spin it down and stop. Yeah. But you know, in a game, we were going, click around the screen, click around the screen, click around the screen. Oh, here's something, we need to play some dialogue. And the disc would go, right, spin up, spin up, spin up, spin up, play the dialogue and spin down, spin down, spin down. And it was useless for games. It wasn't designed for that kind of thing.
Yeah. I remember watching actually a documentary on Myst, which was probably one of the first famous CD-ROM games alongside something like The Seventh Guest. And they went to a great deal of effort to make these static images, and that game was pretty much static images. You're clicking forward and it would just go to a static image, and there'd be some moving elements once you reach that point, maybe, but there's no real transition other than some clever sort of fading animation. But they went to a lot of effort to make sure that all the assets were in kind of a sequential run. So the disc, because it was literally single speed CD-ROM, it was just released. There was no concept of 48 or even dual speed at that time. It was single speed. This is what they had to optimize for. But they tried to get the data in fashion on the CD that it could find it quickly with its laser, so you wouldn't get the pauses and the stutters, etc. But that was certainly, even on the fast 48 speed ones, you'd hear that disc take a while to spin up to full speed, and it made a hell of a noise, let me tell you. Sequentially, it was great, but if it had to jump around the CD to find what it needed, if it needed to play a music track or to hear George Stobart say one line, or Nico or whatever, then it would have to jump the laser around, and it wasn't quite as great then.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you had tools as a developer to actually organize where the data was going to sit, so you could plan for it. But I mean, it was hard for. I don't think we ever did that, because dialogue, you couldn't really tell when. I mean, to some degree, you had a position in the game, but not a very accurate idea of where the disc would need to be at any given time. So I don't think we ever tried, to be honest.
Absolutely.
I mean, but if the CDs were spinning up and spinning down again, then you were in trouble anyway. I mean, what you wanted was like a PlayStation where I assume it just. I mean, it was spinning slowly, but it was always spinning. That was the main thing.
Yeah. And there's more. Again, it was the noise of it spinning up and down, and the faster ones I got fed up with in the end. I think about 32 was the sweet spot for me. 48, the noise of it was vibrating like crazy.
Yeah, like washing machines. Yeah.
It didn't make itself worthwhile because of the noise factor and the speed, like you said. Maybe for installing a game, it's fine because the files were in some sort of sequential order for it to do it. And it was probably, at the time, a relatively big file to install from the CD. Great. But as soon as you wanted to do anything like jump around the disk, no. 32 was probably fine for most things. But my question to you, Tony, is, and I'm as guilty as probably a lot of people out there too, when we think of Broken Sword, we think of the first one, and we probably think of the latest one. And 2 will probably sit in there in our sort of fondness of memory because it was similar to 1. It was just a sequel to 1. But 3 and 4, because they were 3D, I probably don't get the love and attention they deserve. And when we talk about remasters even, we're talking about Broken Sword 1, which makes sense. It's the earliest one. It's probably the one where you can sort of pick out this maybe was the most successful. It's probably the one that sticks on our nostalgic brains. But I don't think the 3D ones probably get the respect they deserve. Maybe a lot of people dismissed it because it was 3D and probably never even touched the game.
Some people.
Yeah. But, if there's anything that would maybe benefit from a remaster today, maybe a newer, updated 3D game engine, increased textures, whatever that may look like, it's probably actually the 3D versions which date quicker than maybe the 2D ones from earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was at Revolution last, they were talking of doing a mobile version of PS3, and I think it was even started, but it's never come out, has it? So it must have gone awry somehow. But I mean, it'd be the usual problem in that we'd almost certainly have the engine, but not the data in any decent form. So then the problem is like, what you can do with, are you going to remodel the whole thing? And when you look at doing that, you go, well, hang on, why are we going to spend $1 million redoing Brensel 3? Well, you might as well spend $1 million doing something new, so then you kind of go, well, is this really worth doing? I mean, I think a mobile version, it would probably be worthwhile. But then it was the engine was Renderware, I think, which obviously has gone. Because very cynically, it was bought by Electronic Arts, who then started to close it down. So like, all of the rest of the industry, which wasn't Electronic Arts, was using Renderware. So like the industry standard, pretty much engine was kicked away, and they were going, haha, you guys, you're going to have to start again using some other engine, I mean, I exaggerate, but that was kind of it, because it died a death. They were quite ambitious for Renderware, but the EA bought them, and we know what happens to things that EA buy. They get taken around the back and shot through the head. And you never see them again.
Wow.
Well, look at their purchases. Bullfrog. What happened to Bullfrog?
Yeah.
What happened to them? Origin. What happened to them? They stop. You don't see them again, do you? If something happens to them, out of sight.
But what could go wrong with remasters, Tony? What could go wrong? Except a lot can go wrong. So I don't know if you've seen any of the videos of Grand Theft Auto, where the earlier ones, Grand Theft Auto 3 and Vice City,
gone wrong, hasn't it?
haven't survived the transition to, I think they're using Unreal Engine. So it's using a brand new game engine, or at least brand new in terms of it's in recent years rather than anything back in the day. And you would think, okay, it's going to bring Unreal technology to Grand Theft Auto. Now, on paper, that sounds great. The results are pretty terrible, unfortunately. I mean, they're working on patches and things to improve it, but it looks pretty dire.
Well, there's more to it than just using the Unreal Engine. It's how do they do it? What have they done with the graphics? Is it actually better graphics, or is it just better rendering of the old graphics? Is it new models and stuff?
It's improved models, so it looks like they've tried to make them curvier, which for the way the models are isn't necessarily a good thing. They look very cartoon-like by the way they've rounded it off. And in adding a modern engine, if you played the PlayStation 2 version, it had an atmosphere about it. It wasn't particularly cutting edge even at the time in terms of graphical splendor, but it was an open world that has to cut back somewhere. But it had an atmosphere about it, a feel. That's been totally lost in these newer ones. So some of the colour filters have gone. There was like blue and greenish tones in some of those Grand Theft Auto games, which has been completely lost in these new Unreal Engine ones. Yes, they've updated textures and increased the quality by either AI or someone manually doing it. But it probably shows by being on a newer engine a lot more of the warts of the game as it was.
Yeah.
Upscaling something that was, not 100% graphical splendor at the time, and there were things that looked better then, and then bring it up to a modern engine and you can see it in all its 4K glory. That's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, you don't get something for nothing very often. That's the problem. So they've. I mean, as I understand it, they've outsourced this work as well. So some of the developers, they've gone, right, here's a bucket full of game stuff, bits and pieces from GTA, and they've said, right, rebuild it on a new engine and get the old graphics and push them through a process that generically improves in quotes each graphical element, and then shove it all back together again and see if it works. I mean, a lot can go wrong with that. I mean, if the strange decision is to outsource it, they should have done it internally. Really, you would need some of the people from the original teams to do it from a we love this project of ours point of view. We're going to lovingly restore it, to a more modern environment somehow. But that might have been handled a bit more sensitively, but it's just been done rather roughly, external.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's astonishing that they would choose to do it that way, and then astonishing that they would screw themselves by actually publishing it when you can presumably just play it for a bit and see that it's not very good, you know.
And that's it. I don't think outsourcing is necessarily a bad thing as long as it's got oversight. But it clearly didn't have oversight, and it clearly didn't have quality assurance and testing, or at least to a degree where whoever did the final rubber stamp to say, "Yep, ship it." I mean, come on.
It's really surprising, isn't it? Because I mean, Rockstar has a kind of image, doesn't it? You know that you kind of, it's kind of prestigious, Rockstar, isn't it? You kind of think, you know, something from them, it's going to be good, you know, and it's not going to have the sort of stuff that say Cyberpunk had. You know, you know that a Rockstar product is going to be quality, you know, because it always has been. So yeah, they've screwed this one up for certain.
It's sad. It's very sad, and it just shows you can't just say, okay, we're going to put a new engine, we're going to upscale the textures, we're going to make it 4K, we're going to round off some of the character models and improve them. It's not always a winning formula. It has to be done with care and attention, and respect the original assets as well. That there is a tone to the game it's trying to achieve, and losing that is probably more of a sin than some of the oddities.
Yeah, I mean, they should have, as I said, they should have done it in-house, and it should have been a little sub-team from the original people that wanted to do it because they love their own game, you know. Outsourcing it was never going to work. It's hard to imagine the thought process behind it, to be honest. Maybe it was the publisher. Maybe it was Take-Two, isn't it? I think.
Well, I'm going to hope for one day that there's Broken Sword 3 and 4 for maybe the Nintendo Switch, which would seem to be a good candidate.
Yeah.
I mean, secretly, I'd prefer 3DS, but I think that's maybe asking too much.
Yeah. I can't speak for Revolution, but I know they're under-resourced, so they don't just spin out versions of this, that, and the other.
I know. A personal desire rather than, Tony, can you poke the right people? It wasn't that. It's more of, it would seem a very good platform for doing it.
I'm just thinking out loud why they've not done it already, to be honest. But, you know, I was talking a few months ago, wasn't I, about a remastered Broken Sword 1 using that magic AI thing. Now, maybe that would go horribly wrong in the way that we've just been discussing with GTA, but you know, and you don't get something for nothing. Although I seem to be getting for something for nothing when I did those experiments with the up-resed Broken Sword 1 images. But it would have been nice to see the selling point on that project would be you know, Broken Sword 1 in a new engine, so working a little bit more freely on PC and Mac, and also, you know, it would go then to Switch, because I think Switch would be a good home for all of the Broken Sword games. I mean, Broken Sword 5 is Switch, isn't it? I think.
No.
I think there's a Broken Sword 5 Switch, and presumably as of like yesterday, there is a Beyond the Steel Sky Switch. But yeah, a Broken Sword 1, 2, 3 Switch would make a lot of sense.
Yeah,
but it would be a huge amount of work.
Well, 5 is certainly on the Switch. It was released in 2018.
Yeah, I think I remember that going on. I mean, I was still around for that kind of thing. I wasn't involved in it, but I remember the meetings and progress and stuff. But you know, we had control of the engine and everything, so there was no reason not to do it. But yeah, I mean, Switch is a lovely little thing, isn't it? So, I mean, Broken Sword 1, 2, with my GBA style interface, maybe could be great, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And
I could do it. Just, it would be a big job, definitely.
Well, I think anything like this is, isn't it? Particularly when you're taking, unless you've got literally every bit of source code, every asset, and it's in a organized fashion. I think it's always going to be a challenge to a certain degree.
That'd be a new UI as well, new screen resolution. Yeah, I mean, it's a reasonably big job, but maybe worth it. You see, maybe worth it.
Well, actually thinking about this, it's not Revolution software, but one of my favourite first-person shooters. Sam the Sorcerer is a very famous first-person shooter. One of my favourite point-and-click adventure games is Simon the Sorcerer. And that was one of those point-and-click adventures where at the bottom of the screen, it would take up probably like a quarter, you had the words for look at, pick up, give, open, as the interactions. And I often felt that was one of like the games where if they were going to do a proper updated version of it, and there's been some mobile 20th anniversary, I think it was, or something along those lines, but really it's just an upscaled version of the original with slightly improved controls for touch and things like that. And that's not what it is, but to sort of rethink what it is completely, to have Sam the Sorcerer drop that bit in the bottom completely and then focus completely on the artwork and the characters. For goodness sake, don't upscale it unless you're just keeping that beautiful pixel art. But you could almost create a widescreen version with the space that then you've got. And I always thought that would have been a great candidate for something like that. And I'm trying to think, would it be a lot of work to do something like that? But in my head, as one of my favourite first-person shooters, one of my favourite point-and-click adventures, I'd have thought that would be a good one. And I'm sure there's a lot of point-and-click adventures, actually, where they've got, certainly of a certain era, where they've got that bit at the bottom with the lookouts and the pickups, etc., the words, where you would click and then click on the actual screen with the landscapes, etc., and the objects, where that would be like a possibility if you were going to sort of rejuvenate some of these games.
Yeah, I mean, the verbalist was a hangover from text adventures, wasn't it? When they said,
yeah,
let's just print them on the screen. I mean, we did it slightly different. In Lower the Temperatures, we had it on a drop down. We had the push, pull, and get and open and all that stuff on a drop down menu. But then with Steel Sky, we suddenly realised that there was no need for any of it, and you just needed to interact and look at. And so we dropped all that, and you don't lose much really from doing it. So yeah, I mean, the same game, you could probably do it with just left and right click, couldn't you? I would have thought. So all of that verb noun stuff can just probably go out of the way. You would have thought. I mean, I've not played it in a long time, so I can't remember. But you know, if they've got the rights and they've got the source code, then they could presumably do it.
Who knows?
I mean, it's always a lot of work, but they could do it. I mean, Simon is on. It must be on Scum VM, yeah.
It was one of the first.
Right. So Scum VM will have the source code, even if no one else does, because they, as we know, are quite good at.
I don't think they have the source code. I think that was one they backwards engineered or reverse engineered.
Right. Well, I mean, whatever they did, they reverse engineered it into source code.
I see. So, in theory, you could do something with it like that.
You could probably go to Scum VM and say, "Oh, we want to do a Switch version. Can we?" As it's all, it's all there. You can go to the repo and look at it, can't you? So presumably you could, with their blessing, you could just take their first or whatever revision of the Simon source code and spin off a side project from Scum VM.
So how? I'm not sure if you even have the answer to this, Tony, but I'll give it a shot anyway. How does it work with open source software in that regards? Because I know there's different levels of. Is it GPLs they have where you can do so much with it, but you have to do something else in return? So I think there's that one version of it. If you use this open source software and modified it anyway, you would have to give that modification back to them as well.
I don't know, because we used this is exactly how we did Steel Sky on the iPhone. We had to go to, because we wrote Steel Sky in assembly code, you know, the hard way. I mean, I did the 68,000 assembly engine, and my friend Dave he ported my code into 8086 PC code, Intel code. And what we gave to ScumVM was that assembly code, probably for the 8086 version. Now they then did an awful lot of work converting that into a C++ equivalent engine that would read the same data. So I mean, when you play Steel Sky on ScumVM, you're playing the original game data with a newly derived. It's not exactly reverse engineered, because we give them the assembly code, but they transposed that into a C++ engine which read the same data. So the game itself doesn't know that it's the same game. Yeah. It doesn't know it's got a different engine running it. So when we did the IBAS, what we call IBAS, the iPhone Steel Sky, we went back to ScumVM and said, can we have our engine back? And I think we may have signed something to sort of license it back or something, but I think we had to credit them or something like that. And maybe we had to publish the engine. Yeah, that was maybe it. Maybe our IBAS engine is actually out there somewhere, and anyone can go and read it. I think that was it. Right. So that engine is somewhere public. I think the work that myself and Joost did to make it into the IBAS one. Yeah, because otherwise we'd be commercially exploiting a piece of open source software, which is against the rules, isn't it, somehow?
Indeed.
But there was a way through it, and I think that was giving that engine out, because it's not actually any use to anyone, because it only runs on an iPhone. Oh. So we were kind of, well, there isn't a downside to this, really, because you couldn't really, you could build a knockoff. You could build someone could do what we did. They could take our source code, build their own IBAS and try and publish it on the App Store. But one phone call to Apple and that gets instantly nuked. It's not really a problem.
Fair enough.
Now, if there was an Android version, what happens on Android? It suddenly it spawned a billion versions, and like you can't keep up with it.
Before you know it, free to play beneath the Steel Sky appears.
And there's buy a hint for $1.
If you want Joey, you need to buy.
Yeah. Would you? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If you want the talkie version, click here.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and there'd be a side load, and it'd be on a side loading pirate thing where even Google can't stop it. So once it goes to Android, you lose control of it pretty quick, in one way or another.
An APK.
Yeah. Speaking of Android Steel Sky, though, I actually got it working. I mean, I'm the only, and I probably said this before as well, but I'm the only person who's ever played Beneath Steel Sky on Android.
So you got it working.
Very fine it was.
How did you get it working?
I got it working. I got it working because obviously I took what we had, and I got it working using a Cocos engine, Cocos 2D, which I'm quite familiar with, or was back a few years ago. So I took out all the Apple stuff and got it working on top of Cocos Android, and it was there and running and stuff.
Have you still got that, Tony?
I probably do somewhere, but I'm not quite sure where. Maybe on those hard disks that we keep talking about.
This is exactly why you need to do a video on these sort of things. Here's Beneath a Steel Sky on Android, which you've never played before.
Yeah. Can't remember when it was. A few years ago now. But yeah, I did actually have it working. And it kind of fell by the wayside through some political problems that we were experiencing at the time. I was doing it away. Well, they didn't like the Cocos way. Basically, it wasn't too popular with some other people. So that's probably what got that. But then I was selling it because along the lines of here's Steel Sky on Android, and that's surely going to help you with your upcoming Beyond the Steel Sky sequel, because you'll get the game to be familiar on the billions of players on Android. It would have made a lot of sense commercially, I would have thought. There you go.
Hey ho. But yes, hopefully we will find that on one of your many hard drives you've got stashed away, desperate to be read.
I may have it not even in such a difficult state as that. Maybe it's on one of my backups somewhere. It wasn't that long ago actually. Maybe it's 5 years ago. So yeah, should still be around.
Well, we've been chatting for over an hour, believe it or not. This is the last podcast of 2021, unfortunately. We're going to take a bit of a break to enjoy the Christmas and the New Year period. We've been doing this every couple of weeks regularly now for quite a number of months. It's been great to have you as my co-host, Tony, and to have all the guests we've had previously as well. And we're hoping to have more people join us and some of the previous guests come back and make a return effort as well. So lots to look forward to. We're certainly going to keep doing the Gaming Gadget podcast in 2022. But for now, take care, everyone. Enjoy your Christmas and New Year, and we'll see you in 2022.